You're 16, and the sea smells nothing like the harbor back home. The ship that took you came at dawn, when the fishing boats were still tied and the market hadn't opened yet. You were carrying bread. You remember that. Bread wrapped in cloth, still warm from your aunt's oven. The men came from the water, with ropes and short blades, moving fast and quiet like something practiced many times before. They took 5 from your village and several from the beach further north. You didn't fight well enough. No one told you how. By the time the sun had climbed fully into the sky, the coastline of everything you knew had disappeared behind a haze of salt and distance. The men don't speak your language. They don't try. They bind your wrists with cord and push you below the deck where the air is hot and tastes of old wood and unwashed bodies. You're still 16 when the ship arrives. The port is loud and blinding, full of color you weren't expecting. White buildings stacked against a hillside. The call of vendors drifting across the water. The smell of spice and animal hide baking under a sun that feels closer here than it ever did at home. They march you through the narrow streets where women pull their veils tighter and children stop to stare. You're the strange one now. Your clothes are wrong. Your skin is wrong. Your hair draws fingers that reach without asking. A man with a ledger walks beside the group and speaks to the captain in Arabic, gesturing at each of you in turn. He stops at you the longest, writes something down. You don't know yet what that number means, but you will. The market's not a building. It's an open square where the sun has nowhere to hide. You're made to stand in line with others taken from different ships, different coasts, different lives. A crowd circles slowly. Men lift your chin to look at your teeth. They press your arms to test the muscle. They speak about you as if you're a horse being considered for purchase. And in every way that matters here, you are. A merchant with a gray beard and amber prayer beads buys you before midday. He doesn't raise his voice. He simply nods and hands over coin. The transaction takes less time than it took to bake that bread you were carrying when they found you. You're 17, and you now live in a household near the edge of the city where the streets are quieter and the walls are thick enough to block the heat. Your work is carrying water, scrubbing tiles, and hauling the laundry of a family with 4 children and a grandmother who watches you from her cushioned corner like a hawk that hasn't decided yet whether to strike. The merchant's wife is firm, but not cruel in the way the stories warned you about. She shows you once how a thing should be done, and expects it done that way every time after. You learn quickly. Survival here is a language too, and you study it the same way you study the words you overhear at meals, mouthing them silently at night when the house goes dark, and the only sound is the call to prayer drifting across the rooftops. A boy named Yusuf works in the courtyard. He was taken 3 years before you from a village somewhere along the Portuguese coast. He speaks enough of a shared tongue to tell you basic things. Don't speak during prayer time. Don't enter the merchant's study. Don't look directly at the eldest daughter. He tells you these things without emotion, the way a man describes a road he has walked so often that he no longer notices the stones. You ask him if anyone has ever tried to leave. He looks at you for a long moment. Then he goes back to chopping wood. You're 18 and you understand more now than you wish you did. The merchant has connections to other households, to men who arrange ransoms and to men who don't. You've heard him mention a letter sent north on your behalf, though no one tells you directly. One morning, the merchant calls you into the main room. A man sits there with paper and a small ink pot. He asks your father's name, your village, your family's occupation. He writes it all down carefully and then leaves. You don't know if this is mercy or commerce. The merchant offers nothing to clarify. He simply nods you back toward the kitchen, and the morning continues as if nothing had shifted. But your hands shake through every task until sundown. The ransom letter goes unanswered for months. Yusuf tells you this is common. Families don't always have the money. Sometimes the letter arrives and the family's already gone, moved or taken themselves, or simply too poor to respond. Sometimes the letter never arrives at all. He says this plainly, refilling a water jar, his voice carrying no more weight than if he were describing rain. You ask him how he stopped hoping. He says he didn't stop. He just moved it somewhere smaller inside himself, somewhere it couldn't take up room he needed for other things. That night you lie on your mat and try to do the same. You're 19 and the second letter was sent. You know because the merchant mentions it to his wife during supper while you clear the plates. Your heart climbs into your throat. You keep your face still. You carry the dishes to the kitchen and press your back against the cool wall and breathe. Weeks pass. then a month. Then the season turns and no one mentions the letter again. The grandmother dies that autumn. There's mourning and ceremony and more work than usual. You move through it all quietly, doing what's asked, sleeping when permitted, eating what's given. The city outside the walls continues as it always has, indifferent to your particular silence. You're 20, and the merchant's eldest son returns from a long trading journey. He's perhaps 30, bearded, carrying the confident slowness of a man who believes rooms belong to him. He looks at you the way the men in the market looked at you. You begin taking the longer route between rooms. You keep to the edges of hallway. You tell Yusuf, and he nods without surprise. He says to stay near the wife when the son is home. He says the wife doesn't want complications any more than you do. It is cold advice, practical, and true. The wife notices without being told. She begins giving you tasks that keep you visible to her and invisible to him. You don't thank her directly. You work harder instead. She understands. The son leaves after 2 months. The household exhales. Even the grandmother's empty corner seems to breathe again. Yusuf is sold that winter to a household further inland. There's no ceremony, no farewell, no last conversation. One morning he's there, and one morning he's not. And the courtyard wood goes unchopped until the merchant hires a different boy to do it. You think about Yusuf often after that. The economy of his gestures, the way he told hard truths with a voice like standing water. You're 22 and a man comes to the house with papers. The merchant receives him in the study. You carry in tea and hear only fragments. A name that sounds close to your father's name. A sum discussed at a tone that suggests that the sum is almost, but not quite enough. The man with the papers comes back a second time, then a third. And on the third visit, the merchant calls you into the study after the tea is poured. And the man looks at you with an expression that you slowly recognize as recognition. He says something in your own language, heavily accented, but unmistakably yours. He says your name the way people from home say it, the vowels landing in the right places. Your knees do not buckle, but they want to. The negotiations take another 4 months. You're not included in them. You're simply present in the house while they are carrying water, scrubbing towels, folding linen, watching the grandmother's empty corner. The merchant is not unkind during this period. He doesn't change how he treats you, and that itself is a kind of information. He has agreed to something. The terms are settled. You know this is the way you know approaching weather. Not from being told, but from reading the texture of the air. You're 23 when the morning comes. The merchant's wife gives you a plain robe, newer than what you've been wearing. She doesn't explain. She points to your feet and hands you sandals that fit. You dress and you follow the steward to the front of the house, where the man with the papers waits with a cart and 2 other men. The merchant stands in the doorway. He nods at you the same way he nods at deliveries confirmed and transactions completed. There's no cruelty in it. There's also nothing else. You step through the gate and onto the street, and the city opens around you in all its noise and heat and indifference. The journey home is long and crosses water again. The boat's smaller this time. The sea is calmer, or you are, or both. The man with the papers explains in his imperfect version of your language that your father paid what he could and the church collected the rest. That it took years because the first letter never arrived and the second arrived in the wrong parish. He says this without apology. The same way Yusuf once explained the road he had walked too many times to feel anymore. You watch the water and say very little. The horizon moves towards you the way all things eventually do. You're 23 and the harbor you grew up beside looks smaller than you remember. The boat's shorter. The hills behind the village less dramatic than the ones you've been seeing in your sleep for 7 years. Your father is at the dock. He's older in a way that moves across his face like weather. He holds your arms and looks at you, and says nothing for a long time. Your aunt is there too, standing slightly behind him, her hands pressed together. The market is open behind them, and someone is selling bread. You could smell it from the dock. You walk forward, and your feet know the cobblestones, even after all this time. And the stones say nothing about where you've been, and you walk.